The Islamic State is unique in its brutality. We heard both Daniel and we heard Azadeh when they talked about the Islamic State's brutality. It's synonymous with global terror today. Physically, the threat posed by the Islamic State fighters may be restricted to one region, but it's their ideology that appears to be spreading like wildfire through the World Wide Web. What is equally mystifying is the fact young, educated Muslims, why would some of them be attracted to the ideology of the Islamic State? And some of them are earning fairly well. We have a few cases in India. May I now invite on stage Ambassador Daniel Benjamin. Ambassador Benjamin was coordinator for counterterrorism in the United States Department under both President Obama and Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State between 2009 and 2012. Ambassador, welcome on stage, sir. So the ambassador will speak for about 8 to 10 minutes on the threat posed by the Islamic State to the world.
And I will do my level best not to have that gong go off because that's deeply disturbing. But anyway, I want to thank India today for inviting me to this wonderful conclave. It's great to be back. I've been coming to India since the 1980s, and it's really a terrific opportunity to participate in a very important discussion. I thought I would start off with a bit of background on the current landscape of terrorism. That is not the first slide. Whatever, we'll just make it up as we go along. So the first thing I wanted to had was actually a slide, I think they loaded the wrong version of this, that showed the growth of terrorist attacks in, would it be possible to get someone to reload this or get it right? The growth in terrorism since 2000, roughly a tenfold increase in the amount of terrorist attacks, which is quite extraordinary and I think historically unprecedented. Quite clearly, we're living through a period of profoundly destructive terrorist activity, and the numbers are really staggering. As no one needs to be told here, the principal reason for that growth has been the spread of jihadist terror, and the other panelists have spoken, I think, quite eloquently about aspects of that. The rise of ISIS in Iraq and Syria, and that map is useful in giving you some idea of all the shifting battle lines there, has had a catalytic effect in this regard, and as an agent of mobilization, ISIS has far outstripped anything done by Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda. And most of those who have been mobilized by ISIS would regard bin Laden's strategy as being sterile and unengaging. The notion of the creation of an actual Islamic State, as well as the declaration of the caliphate by Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, has had an electrifying effect and drawn roughly 30,000 men and women, still predominantly men, from around the world, attracted by the dream of participating in something that would revive the Islamic world of 1,000 or more years ago. And the brutality of the group, and we've heard a lot about that, is really something that it begs us to look at the behavior of gangs to explain, because it conveys to onlookers that, for those who are disenfranchised, for those who feel weak and unempowered, whether they live in authoritarian Arab states or are alienated in Western communities, that this is a group that will have the most power and use the most violence and be the most extreme in the exercise of power. And so therefore it's the group that you would want to be a part of. Now, let's see if we can get any useful, all these images are of course familiar to you. The background to all of this, and we can discuss this more in the Q&A, is the extraordinary sectarian conflict that has gripped the modern Middle East. And somewhere in here was a picture of one of the people behind it. They definitely put up the wrong one, and I apologize for that. But not that guy. He has his own problems. Anyway. It's really quite frustrating. There we go. King Salman. King Salman, and in some ways his opposite number, the supreme leader, bear a lot of responsibility since they are carrying forward a conflict that began with the Islamic Revolution in 1979. And much of the extremism that we see today has been fueled by the efforts of those two states. And increasing that tension and increasing the sectarian strife was the 2003 invasion of Iraq, which put that country, or moved that country into the Shia column, and the 2011 uprising in Syria, which allowed Sunnis to think of moving a different capital into their column. Complicating the situation greatly, the uprisings of the Arab Spring, which through various routes have led to conflict, state failure, and the further spread of radical Islamic groups like ISIS. And some of those images that I flashed through were from Libya, which has seen a kind of evil efflorescence of ISIS. The chaos in Yemen, where ISIS has also appeared, and where the hopes of the Arab Spring were shattered, has also given Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula much more room to operate and to be dangerous. Elsewhere, weak states that don't deliver the social goods for their peoples and thereby give an opening to extremists who practice a very violent kind of identity politics. They've also played a critical role. And here, somewhere in here, there we go, we have Boko Haram, which is Exhibit A in this regard. So the consequences we saw that map of Syria, which I think is quite staggering, and of course the humanitarian crisis there, which has led millions to leave their homes, is certainly the greatest since World War II. They're overburdening neighboring countries. They're flooding into Europe and have created the greatest crisis in post-war European history. And I think it will be an enormous irony if the EU ultimately collapses because of the weight of this migrant and refugee crisis. Additionally, we now have out-of-area attacks, that is to say, attacks by people who we saw before. Right, the Boston Marathon bombing, now that wasn't ISIS, this predates ISIS, but we now have, for example, San Bernardino, Paris. All these are motivated by people who want to be part of the act, who believe that what is going on in ISIS-controlled territory is of historic significance, and that they should be doing their part as well. And so we are seeing, certainly in the West, the growth of homegrown terrorism in a way that we really had only seen sporadically before that. Now, of course, the fact that there's been so much attention shifted to threats emanating from the Middle East and Africa doesn't mean that all the old threats have disappeared, and the slides that I added in here of Pathankot and Lashkar-e-Taiba are not in this set. But these are issues that no one in this room needs to be reminded of. They continue to be out there, and we'll talk more about them momentarily. But the other things that I think that we can say are that we need to be very careful about how we characterize the threat. We need to be very cautious about overstating it. And in particular, I think we need to avoid any kind of hair-on-fire claims, as we saw from, for example, Senator Lindsey Graham, who claimed that ISIS was coming to the United States to burn American cities, Republican contender Mike Huckabee, who said that this was the new Pearl Harbor. He's confused. And then, of course, you know, the man who's really done his very best to heighten the threat with Islamophobic statements of a really unprecedented nature in our public discourse in the United States. This is only adding to the alienation, the insulating, the separating of the Muslim community in the United States and around the world increasingly, and it will only come back to bite us because certainly, as law enforcement officials know very well in India, And as we know very well in the United States, Muslim communities are our first line of defense. And if they don't feel confident in the states they're living in, we're all going to be much more endangered. So let me just say in closing that we have some things on our side. And those were some of them. I actually am much more confident about our military and intelligence's capability to reduce and ultimately destroy the Islamic State as a geographic entity, but that will not kill the ideology. It will dent it because the attraction of building that state, which has done so much to bring people from around the world, will have been eliminated, but nonetheless, it will be a very effective way of reducing the amount of plotting that's going on, because right now we face enormous safe havens, and drones, by the way, are an essential part of that. Also, partnerships among special forces, U.S. forces working, this is in Afghanistan, will play an important role in the future, and I think we're quite in good shape there. It takes a lot of patience to get these things done. And patience has never been one of the great characteristics of democracies. There was another slide I was going to show of diplomats, because partnership and cooperation on deepening the rule of law, on combating violent extremism, on capacity building is also an essential part of it. Now, the parts that I don't have a solution for are the social media aspect, which I think we showed earlier, and we just don't know. We just don't know really how much that has accelerated the spread of the ideology, how much it has, there we go, those kinds of things, how much it has empowered the ideologues to spread their message, and how durable that effect will be. We're really still in the early days of understanding what social media has done to a revolutionary cause like ISIS. And I would say another thing that we don't have a solution for, I won't go all the way back to, is the sectarianism, which is driving this conflict quite remarkably. And I see no off-ramp in the near future, and so long as that continues, it will throw off sparks and encourage people to take action in much the way that we have seen thus far. So if you'd like, I'll come back tomorrow and show that, there he is again, and show the correct slideshow. But in the meantime, I think we should talk about India, which remains to me, and I think to experts around the world, one of the most amazing and encouraging stories in the coexistence between Muslims and non-Muslims that any of us is aware of. And in fact, it's quite something that needs greater study and also, I think, great attention to ensure that nothing goes wrong, because your Muslim community is enormous, and it would be really a tragic thing if it were to be alienated and to fall prey to radicalization.